Hello, faithful friends of the internet. I'm Jason Mayfield. This is Grace for Today, the show where I teach the Bible and help you experience grace for life through Jesus Christ. While it's today, mind you, that's why we call it Grace for Today. You know, I know it sounds like a morning show. It's really not. It's not a morning show. It's just I want to encourage you while it's still today. I think about that verse in Hebrews that I read all the time. Just, encourage one another while it is still today. I want to encourage you today. Hey, today I want to talk to you about this. The will of God is not a mystery. The will of God is not a mystery. I know you're thinking, Jason, please explain that. Well, I will. Let's go in the Bible today over to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. I'm going to go to Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. Once you have it, I want you just text me. We're doing that this week. 941-202-6404. 941-202-6404. You can text me. Just say, I got it. I got it. By today, I should be knowing what all these I got it's are in reference to. The thing is right now, present Jason will be past Jason when present Jason is getting all of these text messages. And present Jason is going to be like, past Jason? Why? But I want you to text me. 941-202-6404. Romans chapter 2. And we'll go there in just a second. I want to take a minute. I want to talk to you about the will of God not being a mystery today. Because, I think the number one concern I have around the whole concept or the whole talk about the will of God is the fact that it ends up usually being over-processed. People just over-processing what is the will of God. And it's resulting in, I borrowed this from Dave Ramsey, but it results in the paralysis of the analysis. People end up being confused. They end up being depressed. They end up being exhausted. And so they just, because there's this feeling, as the more and more I process, what is the will of God? You never quite know what the will of God is, and so the more you process, what is the will of God? Did I miss it? Did I get it? Did I make it? I had an opportunity years ago. I never really talk about this, but I was a music guy for a long time. Some of you probably remember, I'm Pentecostal. I don't hide that. I'm not ashamed of it. But there was a big revival that broke out in Lakeland, Florida, several years ago. Todd Bentley and all that stuff. And I remember I had an opportunity to come to Lakeland that was kind of potentially floated around as the music guy. And I didn't pursue it because I was getting married. I wanted to be mindful of my obligations and stuff with Ashley. And so I didn't take it because it was going to be like a part-time gig. And so I didn't go, went somewhere else. And while I was there, like a couple months later, the revival breaks out. Now, if you don't know anything about me, when I was a music guy, that scene, I like, not what it really is now. So if you have like a Bethel view and everything, that's not what I like. But I wanted to be in the middle of what God was doing. And I remember when it broke out, I thought, oh my Lord, I missed God. I missed God. Then a few months later, all that mess came out about how crazy Todd Bentley was and stuff. And I thought, I heard from God. But, you get into this analysis of the paralysis. Am I in the will of God? Am I out of the will of God? Am I going to miss the will of God? What happens if I miss the will of God? Can I get back in the will of God? And like I said, it causes that confusion. Some people end up getting depressed. Some people end up it is exhausting. So here's a tip for remembering the will of God. Always remember grace. Just remember grace. This great phrase is not unique to him, but my pastor, Philip McElhaney, used to say this to me all the time. He used to say, there's nothing you will do that can make God love you more, and there's nothing can you do that will make him love you less. I think it was actually, there's nothing can you do that will make him love you more. There's nothing will you do that will make him love you less. And you're fine. And I want you to be encouraged with this, okay? You write this down today before we get into the word. If you're concerned with the will of God, most likely you're in it. If you're concerned with it, most likely you are in it. So let's go to Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So, number one, you can write this down. Don't fall into the trap of believing that the will of God is mysterious. That's the number one thing you got to remove. Got to remove this idea that the will of God is mysterious. Let's go back to Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Look what it says right here. It says that by testing you may discern what is the will of God. Listen, a renewed mind can distinguish his will in different situations. A renewed mind can distinguish his will in different situations. The will of God is less discovered and it is more discerned. It's recognized. It's judged. You look at a situation and you discern what is the will of God. The will of God becomes more and more obvious once you start coming into alignment with his thoughts. Also, coincidentally, the more you come into a revelation of grace, the more his will is going to be obvious. But you do not have to be concerned. I really want to dispel this for a moment. Because what we do is we get into this thing where finding the will of God is like searching for hidden treasures. It's like going out and finding something that, we're searching for the Holy Grail. But that's not the reality of it. You're not going to make a decision to marry somebody and marry the wrong person because there was only one person for you to marry. You're not going to go get a job and miss out because you didn't get the one specific job that God wanted you to get. That's not going to happen. Now, to go back to the marriage thing, though, you can go out and marry. Man, I might get off into something that I don't want to get off into here. But you might go out and marry some loser. Talking to you, ladies. You might go out and marry some loser and find yourself out of the will of God. Why? Because he was the wrong one? Because you didn't pick the one for you? No. Because you went out and you picked somebody who is completely outside of the characteristics that would align with the thoughts of God. This is not hard. If he gets drunk every night, can't hold down a job, gets upset every time you try to do something, doesn't trust you, hits you, this is not hard to discern the will of God on. He's not the one, honey. He's not the one. And so, sometimes we just aren't discerning. Some of y'all go out and you marry the best guy possible who is unsaved. It is beyond obvious that the will of God might include you marrying somebody who's saved. This is not rocket science theology here, okay? This ain't no rocket surgery, okay? This is obvious stuff. And so the will of God is not mysterious. We need to get that out of our brain today. Because the longer that you carry that thought that the will of God is mysterious, the more you're going to think that it's out there. It's out that the will of God is so far out there that I'm never going to be able to grab a hold of it. But the will of God is not mysterious. It is not that difficult. It is discerned. And there are situations you're going to get into where it is going to be more difficult to discern the will of God because you're hopefully, by the grace of God, you're choosing between a lot of good options. But the will of God in most scenarios is not that difficult to discern. The will of God is not a mystery, period. Hey, I just want to take a second and let you know that I really appreciate our monthly ministry partners. Without these guys, the future of this ministry is not going to be possible. Right now, I basically fund everything out of pocket. And what these guys give and these ladies give every month is super appreciated and it is helpful. Right now, I'm funding everything out of pocket. The problem with that is scale. If we really want to reach a lot of people with the gospel of grace, we're going to need people to partner with us financially. And I want to invite you to do that today. I want to invite you to go to jasonmayfield.com/give to give your tax-deductible donation to this ministry. Listen, if you'll set up a monthly recurring donation, you're going to get early access to content. Ha! You're going to get early access to content, but also, listen, we've got a lot of interesting things that are coming up over the next few weeks. Just some opportunities that have come up because So much content is being produced right now. And honestly, without your financial support, I might not be able to pursue all of those opportunities. The ones that we can and the ones that we can fund, I'm going to be letting you know what those are over the next few weeks. We've got some really big stuff going on. It's pretty awesome. I'd tell you right now, we're just not ready to roll it out. But if you're a monthly ministry partner, you're going to be one of the first people to find out about it. So make sure that you go to jasonmayfield.com/give, set up your monthly recurring donation so you get that early information, you get access to content early, and most importantly, you can help more people experience grace for life through Jesus Christ. So today we're talking about the fact that the will of God is not a mystery. And so the number one thing that you need to remember is that the will of God's not mysterious. Don't fall into that trap. So that was the number one thing that we talked about. Now, number two, don't fall into the trap that the will of God is finitely specific. Some of us think that the will of God is this little atomic space that you got to hit. And if you don't hit that, that's not the will of God. Well, that's not the truth. It's actually pretty significant that in the Hebrew language, there is actually no word for will or for will of God. It's actually more of an idea, more of a concept. You see things like desires or wants and things like that, pleasing to Him, displeasing to Him. But the will of God is not a finite, specific little spot. And that's really important for us to know, because some of us are so bent out of shape over the will of God. What is the will of God for my life? What is the definite article? What is the will? God only has one will, and I've got to nail it. If I marry the wrong person, I missed it. If I get the wrong job, I missed it. If God called me to serve the people of Ecuador, but I went to El Salvador, I missed it. If I don't nail it right between the eyes, I've missed the will of God. We get bent out of shape over the will of God. But what we have to remember is that the will of God is less of a spot and it's more of an area. It's more of a zone. It's more of a zone. There are principles that really shape what is the will of God. I talked about this a moment ago. Is that, here's, when you're choosing a spouse, are they saved? Okay, that's good. The Lord probably wants you to marry somebody who's saved. I want you to marry a Christian. Does this person get drunk every night? Okay, if they do, probably not the person. Okay, does this person have a vision for their life to move forward? If they don't, probably not the person. And I go back to this with women because I don't understand this proclivity that women have to choose absolute losers. I mean, I watch some ladies marry men who just have no ambition, no desire. And in our situation, I want to be real transparent. Ashley makes considerably more money than me. Ashley is the big driving personality in our family now. That's not what she married into, right now, because we get into a lot of circles where Ashley's really the celebrity of the moment. And so people will be like, oh my gosh, your husband must just be so quiet. Does he just follow you around? And people are like, or Ashley will be like, you haven't met Jason. It's just not, she married into that, or big ambition, big dreams. I did most of the stuff I set my mind to do. We had some derailing that ended up giving us a lot of prosperity. I'll take that derailing. I'll take that. I'll accept that. But for real, I mean, women with this proclivity to marry guys who are just total losers, I have no idea what that's about. Women with lots of potential. You get a girl with 2 master's degrees, can cook, and then she'll marry some bum. Makes no sense to me. Makes no sense. And then be angry at men. Of course you're angry at men. You married a loser. Don't do that. So the will of God is less of a spot, more of a zone. Don't fall into the trap that the will of God is finitely specific. Number 3, don't fall into the deception that the will of God is against you. Don't fall into the deception that the will of God is against you. This is probably my most major concern with Calvinism, is that it puts on the table the option that God might just not want me to be saved. That is so dangerous. And I feel the danger on that because I honest to goodness believe that if God was choosing people, he wouldn't choose me. And I have a massive revelation of grace. But if we're picking teams, I'm not picking me. And so I really just don't believe that if Jesus Christ did not die for everyone, and if the efficacy of the cross didn't touch every individual's potential to be born again, then I don't believe I'm one of them. But I believe that God gave his son for the whole world, died for the sins of all men and women of all time, died for everybody, so that everybody might have an opportunity to come into the kingdom. Praise God. I believe that. But God is for you. If you get into this idea, this deception that God's will is against you, it's going to mess you up. Listen to this. Romans 8:31 says, what then shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? You know what's funny about that question is, people can be against you. People will take that and go, well, if God be for me, nothing can be against me. Nothing can stand against me. A lot of stuff can stand against you. A lot of people can be. God's for me, and I got people being ugly to me on this channel every day. I get called a false teacher all the time. People can be against you, but they're not gonna succeed in that. God is for you, and if you disconnect from that, all your decision making is thrown off balance. If you believe that God's will is against you, you're gonna be so bound up and not able to make any decisions and not able to move forward. Listen to this. When you start to think God is angry with you and that you are now outside of his blessing and his favor, you can't think straight about the purposes of God because you're no longer thinking with a mind that is renewed. A renewed mind can find the will of God. Remember this, okay? A renewed mind is rooted in the new covenant. You need to have a renewed mind. You need to be anchored in the new covenant. Listen to this. Number 4, God is pleased with the process. God is pleased with the process. Listen to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 14. For by a single offering, he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. I think it's incredible that right there it says that by what Jesus did, he has perfected people who are being sanctified. Perfected and sanctified are basically the same word. They're basically the same word. But he's saying, I have already perfected everybody who's in the process of being sanctified. If you're in the process, you're perfected. If you're in process, you're perfected. You're still being sanctified, but you're perfected. You're still getting to perfect, but you're perfect. You're still getting there, but you're there. You're getting there, but you're there. I've perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. So right now, what I would encourage you to do is when you're looking for the will of God, there are some specific things in your life that are the will of God. I mean, I know that God called me to teach and help people experience grace for life through Jesus Christ. That's not just a generic thing anybody could fall into. But start with what you do know and then graduate to the specifics. The will of God. I'll go back to this marriage example. It's so good. Ladies, the will of God for you is not to marry some bum loser who's unsaved. It's the will of God. That's the will of God. We can graduate to the specifics. He's called to do this. I know ladies who feel a particular calling to marry a pastor. We can graduate to those specifics later, but let's start with what we know. By the way, if you're marrying a pastor, you need to make sure he's not a bum loser too. I mean, you need to marry somebody who's got some stuff on him. But here's something that I think will help you a lot. The best way to get a word from God is to obey the one you currently have. A lot of people are waiting to hear from God, for God to reveal the next step, for God to reveal the will that he has for them. And they're waiting on a word from God. But the problem is they've got this word that they've already set up on the shelf and they've been unattentive to it. When God has given you a word, you need to obey that word first. Once you implement that word, then God's going to give you the next step. God typically talks step by step to people. The Holy Ghost communicates step by step. So the best way to get more revelation on what you need to do is to just simply submit to the thing that he's already told you to do. All right, my friends, I want to bring something to your attention. I don't want to alarm you. I don't want to scare you, but listen, the reality is what we've learned in the last year is that there is somewhat of a censorship issue when it comes to big tech. And so while I'm not over here saying things that are necessarily getting flagged like crazy, I will let you know. There are things that I cannot say on this channel because I do not want to put the message in jeopardy. I want to make sure that I'm able to keep things moving forward and that big tech isn't shutting down the voice of this channel in the digital space. That being said, censorship has just become a real issue that I'm concerned with. And I want to be able to be protected against that. And the way that we're doing that is I am really trying to do some preliminary research on what it's going to look like to build our own platform. This is a platform that'll obviously help me and help you in our relationship, but also a platform that's going to help other ministers and other voices that we need to make sure have a space to preach the gospel without being held down and suppressed by robots and algorithms and stuffs and things. So all of that to say, what I need you to do today, so I can make sure that I get the existing content that is on YouTube, it is on the podcast, it is on Facebook, so I can get this existing content to you, I need you to go over to jasonmayfield.com and I need you to sign up for Grace for Today updates. That's going to help me make sure that you are seeing new information and new content when it's released. If you don't do that right now, we're kind of a slave to big censorship or big tech censorship. And so go over there and make sure you sign up so I can get information to you. But the other thing is we need to build this platform. And if we're going to build the platform, it's going to cost a lot of money. Matter of fact, I've been running some numbers. We're looking at probably a minimum of about $3,000 a month to not be everywhere, but to be in some really critical spaces. And so about $3,000 a month is what we need to start raising fairly immediately, so we can be protected from any kind of big tech censorship and we can make sure that we start getting a foothold in the digital space. So one, this message can go forward, but secondly, so we can help other ministers do it as well. So go over to jasonmayfield.com/give and set up your monthly ministry gift, your monthly recurring donation. And that way we can start building towards that $3,000 a month and know that we'll be able to build that platform out and make sure that we keep censorship from being a major issue. So today we've been talking about the fact that the will of God is no mystery. But I know that you're probably thinking to yourself, what are some next steps that I can take? So I'm going to give you some next steps real quick. First of all, I just want to encourage you. I want to go back to something that I said earlier. If you are concerned about the will of God, most likely you are in it. If you're concerned about the will of God, most likely you're in it. Last thing that I said in the last segment was, God is pleased with the purpose, or God is pleased with the process. If you're in the process of figuring out the will of God, if you're concerned with it, man, God's pleased with that. And if God's pleased with it, then you're in the will of God. Praise the Lord. But here's a little simple formula that I want to help you with that you can use to implement in discerning the Word of God. It's actually given to us right there in Romans chapter 12. We typically read this and think that God has a good will, an acceptable will, and a perfect will. We actually talk a lot about this in churches where God has an acceptable will and a perfect will. And it's like hey, listen, God has a will, okay? There, simple. God has a will. There's no, you might be off, you might be in the perfect will. Let's not get into that. But these things will help you discern. So I use kind of a 3-point, check system. I mean, I'm not really checking it off, but these are things you can bounce off of. Is it good? Is it acceptable? Is it perfect? Now, there's a lot of stuff here, and I've taught a message on this before. I've taught this, but I don't have time to get into all the details, so you're going to have to kind of just roll with me today. Number one, is it good? Is it right or is it wrong? If it's right, God wants you to do it. If it's wrong, it's out of the will of God. If you got to choose between murdering somebody and not murdering somebody, God would prefer you not to murder them. You got to choose between stealing something and not stealing something. I think that God's will would lean itself towards don't steal it. Simple stuff, right or wrong. Number two, acceptable. This word right here is actually a word, I think this word is euaristos in the Greek. There's another word for prosper in the Bible that's euhodos or euodos. The prosperity part of that word actually comes from the eu. The hodos or the odos is a way or a journey. It's a road. So the eu actually is in this word, euaristos. Is acceptable? Is it good for you? Does it prosper you? So here's a question. Does it prosper you? Does it prosper your mission? That's another thing. The will of God. Does it prosper you? Does it prosper your mission? Is it right or is it wrong? Does it prosper you, prosper your mission? And number three, perfect. The will of God is perfect. Here's the third thing. Does it flow from the finished work of Jesus Christ. You know, the will of God for your life is that you experience grace for life through Jesus Christ. That's the will of God for your life. The will of God for your life is that things flow from the finished work of Jesus Christ. So a good checkpoint there. Is it right? Is it wrong? Does it prosper me or my mission? Does it flow from the finished work of Jesus Christ? That's all I have for you today. I'm praying that you continue to experience grace for life through Jesus Christ. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Before you run away, you could click some of these things right here and watch them. I think those might be videos that interest you. Or you can click my face and subscribe to the channel, which really helps me because it boosts our algorithm, helps us share the gospel with more people, but also helps you stay informed. I've been talking this whole time just so you could do this.